Today, John's going to be discussing how, well, he's going to be talking a lot about diabetes and talking about how what you eat can affect whether you get it or not. And also, if you do have it, what you can do about it by maybe looking at changing your diet and other lifestyle pillars that we can talk about too. So, to be able to prevent and manage and even reverse diabetes, John, that's a big promise. What do you say about that?
Oh,
Huh?
yeah, I'm up for the challenge though. I'm up for the challenge. So we'll see.
Okay.
We'll see what happens, but I'm up for the challenge.
All right. Well, I think what we're going to do is we're going to start with our game of true or false.
It's time for True or False on Be Green with Amy Live. Answer true or false to Amy's questions in the comments below, and Amy will ask our guest for the expert answer.
Okay.
Okay, true or false?
True or false. So people are going to type in the comments, but we're not going to wait for their answers. We'll let you answer it pretty soon after we ask the question. And the first one is true or false, Green Warriors. Type in your answer. Approximately 25% of people with diabetes in the U.S. and nearly 50% of Asian and Hispanic Americans with diabetes are undiagnosed. I should say undiagnosed. Okay. And guys, you can type in your guess. And John, what do you have to say about that? Okay. So what do you have to say, John? We may have lost him. Can you hear me?
Do you want me to go ahead and answer?
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Yeah, I barely can hear you, but
Okay.
okay. Yeah, so this one is true, and we've got someone that responded. But yeah, approximately 25% people with diabetes in the U.S. and nearly 50% of Asian and Hispanic Americans with diabetes are undiagnosed. So it's pretty alarming, but that is a true statement. So.
Wow. Well, that's a big deal. And I guess that's one of the reasons why you're here today, because this is something that's affecting a big proportion of the population. And it seems that the numbers are just ticking up as the years go by. I remember my grandma, she had type 2 diabetes, but they called it adult onset diabetes at the time. And so children didn't even get this type 2 diabetes as such. So it's very good to talk about that. Let's also talk about this, true or false. Besides women who were diagnosed with gestational diabetes, regular testing for all other adults should begin at age 50. True or false, Green Warriors? Type in your answer. And then, John, what do you say about that?
Good question. So this one is actually going to be false. Regular testing for adults should begin at age 45, actually. And that's one thing that comes with nutrition, is that a lot of times it comes to the things that we can do to reverse or manage diabetes has to do with timing. So starting at age 45, it's a really good idea when you're visiting your primary care physician to have your A1C checked, just to see if you're in either that pre-diabetic or diabetic range. That way, the sooner that we can identify that, the sooner that we can act, and hopefully that the primary care physician has some good knowledge, but also potentially can refer to a certified diabetes education specialist like myself. I happen to work and support, I do work in an outpatient clinic here in Fort Worth, Texas, and support approximately 40 different primary care physicians, nurse practitioners. And so they refer their patients to myself so we can do that one-on-one lifestyle disease management. But the sooner the better, but age 45 is the actual age.
Wow. Well, that's a big deal, because if this is something that we can prevent, and I think that people could be walking around not knowing that they have this. I think that for me, I was headed in that direction. As I said, my grandma had it, and then my mother wound up getting it too.
Mm.
And I always felt a little shaky between meals, a little weak, and I just thought that that was normal hunger, but it wasn't. And I think that if I kept going on the plan that I was on, which was no plan, just the standard American diet, I think I probably would have wound up getting the diabetes as well. And I did notice after adopting a plant-based diet that it definitely did help the way I felt in between meals. So I'm glad that you're talking about that. And then we're going to ask this next question, and then we're going to clarify first what this is, because it's about A1C. And maybe before you answer it, you're going to talk to us about what A1C is while people try to answer it. And that is true or false, periodontal disease is linked to higher A1C. So for those that are not familiar with A1C, maybe you can talk about that first before you answer.
Yeah, A1C is basically an average of someone's glucose levels over a 2 to 3 month period of time. So it really gives an idea of their average blood sugars over that period of time. So pre-diabetes, if someone's A1C is between 5.7, is considered 5.7 to 6.4. And then at 6.5 or higher, that's considered actually diabetes. So, but that's usually what's checked when you have a visit. And it's good to just ask for it to make sure that you're getting that checked, especially again at that age 45. Or if you're overweight, or if you have a family history, anybody that, like you mentioned, you had your grandmother. So if you have any family history, or if you're considered overweight or obese, or if you feel like you just want to have it checked, so it's a good idea to have it checked.
Okay, so higher A1C with periodontal disease.
That is a true statement. So yeah, your dental health is an important factor. So periodontal disease is linked to higher A1C numbers. That is true.
That is just so amazing. So if you don't care about anything else, a lot of people do care about their smile, and that's pretty amazing. That I guess doctors and healthcare professionals can tell a lot when the doctor, you go for a checkup and they tell you to open your mouth and say and there's a reason, right? They're looking for a lot of different things, and that may be one of the things that they're looking for. I remember I interviewed Dr. Clapper, and he said that healthcare professionals and doctors especially, they can look at you and not even ask you any questions and tell a lot about your body and about your health by looking in your eyes and your mouth and your tongue and the state of your gums and your gait. And there's just so many telling things about people that they can see, which is, I thought, was just fascinating. And there you have it. That's one of them.
Right.
So if somebody did go and get their A1,
exactly.
if somebody did go and get their A1C tested, and what number are they looking for, and what do they have to be concerned with?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Okay, if somebody,
If you can
I don't know
repeat the question.
Yeah, sure. Is your volume all the way up? I'm not sure if your volume control is up, but if somebody did get the A1C tested, what is the doctor looking for, and what should they be concerned about?
Well, yeah, going back to the first thing that if they get an A1C, and if it's over 5.7, then they're considered pre-diabetic. And so a second thing then they could look at potentially is their lipids, which are their cholesterol numbers, things like total cholesterol, and then low density lipoprotein. Also the liver enzymes to see if they potentially have fatty liver disease. And so from there, the doctor can start to prescribe lifestyle modification. And sometimes if they're considered pre-diabetic, they potentially can prescribe a medication. Usually the first line medication is metformin, which metformin metformin is a medication that can basically help slow down the release of glucose from the liver, because the liver is a storage organ for sugar. And then second, metformin can help reduce insulin resistance, which insulin resistance is one of the things that causes high blood sugar levels. And then from there, hopefully they'll talk about lifestyle modification. If the person's overweight or more sedentary, hopefully they'll do a referral to myself, like a dietitian, a certified diabetes educator. And then from there, we work closely with patients. We meet patients where they are and help understand what their goals are and their concerns about their health, and help make lifestyle adjustments from there. But also just really trying to provide practical solutions for people that they can sustain over the long term. And so it's not really, there's no one size fits all solution. But the research shows that following like a plant-based diet or a less refined sugar type of diet can really help with weight loss, and then also incorporating exercise and exercise routine. So usually we'll establish things like SMART goals, which are small, achievable goals that are specific for that patient, and then do follow-ups from there. So that's usually the course of action. If you're visiting your PCP, and hopefully either if that's happening to you, you can reach out to myself, or if you have someone in your area that you'd like to work with, like a registered dietitian and a certified diabetes educator, you can take those steps from there.
Yeah, it's nice when the healthcare professionals are familiar with the research and the science, but some of them seems that they're not. And I have talked to people who have been diagnosed with diabetes or pre-diabetes, and they've had nutrition recommendations from their healthcare professionals, like don't eat fruit, or go on a keto diet and things like that. So can you talk about those different foods and why they may or may not be a good idea to avoid or incorporate?
Yeah, good question. So again, it really, when you look at the research, starting with the American Diabetes Association, they recommend certain things. Number one is that they do not recommend that there's a specific macronutrient distribution, meaning that there's no one size fits all solution. So there's no recommended, you should eat so much protein, so much carbohydrates, and so much fat. But some of the things that they do recommend is to follow the normal dietary guidelines. So as an example, for saturated fat or for fat in general, the dietary guidelines for Americans do not recommend a specific amount of fat that someone should follow, but they do recommend limiting saturated fat. And so as we know, saturated fat really comes mostly from animal products. So the recommendation from the dietary guidelines for Americans, which is really science-based, it's evidence-based, the recommendation is not to exceed more than 10% of total calories from saturated fat. So there's a second type of fat that's called unsaturated fat. And unsaturated fat comes from more plant sources like avocados, nuts, and seeds. Unsaturated fat is considered more heart healthy because it's protective for the health and will help reduce things like high cholesterol and also low density lipoproteins. As an example, if someone is eating a predominantly animal-based diet, and if you look at the dietary guidelines for Americans recommendation, let's say as an example that they're following a 2,000 calorie diet, that means that their saturated fat, the recommendation is to limit it to no more than 10%, which is 200 calories from saturated fat. So like as an example, one idea would be to shift some animal fats to plant-based fats. An example would be to substitute butter, like a simple swap would be to substitute butter with avocado, which avocado is healthy to fat because it's a unsaturated fat, so it's heart healthy. So that's one thing. Second thing would be to shift from more of animal sources of protein to more plant sources of protein. As an example, switching or substituting things like lentils, like red lentils, for meat for spaghetti sauce. Lentils are high in protein, and they also have some carbohydrates, but also they are also high in fiber. And so fiber really helps with increasing gastric or reducing gastric emptying, meaning that you'll stay fuller for a long period of time. And studies show that increasing your fiber intake will help slow down sugar release of the sugars into your bloodstream. So that's one of the recommendations from the dietary guidelines from Americans, which is supported by the American Diabetes Association, is making a shift from, again, saturated fat, which is more animal-based, to plant fats. Again, there's just a few ideas there. A second idea would be by reducing refined grains to increasing more whole grains. And the dietary guidelines for Americans, again, recommend having at least half of our grains be whole grains. Whole grains are high in fiber and also have been proven to lower cholesterol levels. So as an example, if you're used to eating white rice, which is a refined grain, just making an easy swap to a whole grain like brown rice for, let's say, lunch or dinner, will help increase your fiber intake, which will help slow down the release of the sugar into the cells and will help with blood sugar control and bring down your A1C numbers. But also unrefined grains like brown rice, old-fashioned oatmeal, they're full of nutrients and will help with weight loss because it keeps you full for a long period of time because it's a soluble fiber. Soluble meaning that when we eat soluble fiber foods, they retain water and expand. And so what that does is, again, keep you full for a longer period of time. So when it comes to, when I talk to people and patients that, are talking about different types of diets, I try to emphasize, what's going to work for them, but also emphasize, what the science says, what the American Diabetes Association says, what the dietary guidelines for Americans say, because those are evidence-based. And just I'll bring up one study that was published in JAMA, and this was actually a 16-week randomized control trial, and it was showing the effect of the purpose of the trial was to show the effect of a low-fat vegan diet on body weight, insulin sensitivity, and also on lipid levels inside the cells in overweight adults. Dr. Neil Barnard from Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, he was one of the authors of this study. It was a 16-week study. And some of the findings of this 16-week study is that, and this was 244 participants participated in this study. The average weight loss for the people that followed the low-fat vegan diet on body weight, they saw a weight loss on average of 5.9 kilograms, which is almost 13 pounds of body weight loss over that 16-week period of time. Also, they saw a increase in insulin sensitivity, which means that it was easier for them to control their blood sugar levels. And so there were also reductions in their lipid levels in their cells, and again, increased insulin sensitivity. So also in the study, they did note that there were some limitations in that the participants, it was reported food journals but there are some limitations with any type of nutrition intervention. But so this study shows that a low-fat vegan diet is proven for weight loss to be successful and increasing insulin sensitivity. So there's a lot of science on following more of a plant-based diet, because automatically when you incorporate more plants into your diet, you're reducing saturated fat, which the guidelines say to reduce to 10%, and you're increasing fiber in your diet, which fiber is a really big key with reducing or with controlling blood sugar levels in someone's diet.
Right. So I'm
Hopefully that
hearing,
was helpful.
oh, very helpful. There were so many things that you talked about. One of the things that you discussed was about fat in animal products, and some people don't even realize that cheese and milk are an animal product. But anyway, I remember when I was on the standard American diet and I would have meat and I would carve off the fat off the around the edge of the meat, thinking that I was taking out the fat, right?
Right.
And now I was, that's what I thought. But that's not really totally taking the fat out of the meat. Is that right? Because
I'm sorry, I
yeah,
didn't
that's
follow
yeah.
the last part of that question.
Sure. I'm not sure. Maybe your volume control in your earbud set might be lowered. Maybe you need to raise it up. That might help. But anyway, what I was saying is that just cutting the fat off of your meat doesn't take the fat
Right.
out of your meat.
Yeah, I mean, I talked. Yeah, exactly. I mean, so just as an example, I looked at a cut of a ribeye steak has a lot more fat on it, that white marbling, than a sirloin. So that's usually, if someone does want to stick with animal sources of meat or protein, usually that's the first start, is by choosing leaner cuts of meat. And then the second option would be to reduce the portion size, because most people, I think it's very important when it comes to weight loss to meet your protein need, but not to really exceed it, so to speak. For many people, it could be by instead of eating an 8-ounce piece of ribeye, to choose a 4-ounce ribeye, or not 4-ounce sirloin. You're reducing your saturated fat drastically by reducing the size and by reducing the type of cut of the meat that you're choosing.
Right. And then you talked about other things. I mean, let's talk about sugar, because I think a lot of people think that sugar, as in fruits or maybe in processed foods, that is why people have diabetes, is because they have to stay away from
Okay.
all kinds of sugar. So can you talk about sugar?
Yes. So, yeah, it's a great question, and I get that question often. So, when it comes to diabetes, maybe taking a little bit of step back, there are two basic types of diabetes. You have type 1 diabetes, which means that the person has to inject insulin. And then you have type 2 diabetes, where the person may or may not have to use insulin. Their pancreas may secrete insulin. So it depends on the person, and that should be individualized. But there are many benefits to eating sugar. First of all, sugar and carbohydrates in general are our preferred energy source. Our body actually prefers that over protein and fat as a energy source to begin with. So you can get things that have sugar in it in your diet because our body prefers it. That's the first thing. But if you are someone that's on insulin, like a type 1 diabetic, you do want to have an idea of how much. I think the two main things are to understand how much carbohydrates that you're eating per meal. And then second is the type of carbohydrates that you're eating, because whether they're carbohydrates from fruit or from more processed like white rice or sugary things, they'll eventually be turned into glucose, and they need to enter the cell. But what the main difference is that something that is more processed, that's more refined, will first of all lack fiber. Fiber will make the sugar go into the bloodstream a lot faster, and also will go through the body a lot faster, meaning that you probably will become hungrier faster and tend to overeat those foods faster. And so the more refined it is, also typically it's also lacking nutrition. So there's really no real benefit to eating more refined grains and things like sodas and Gatorades. I have patients that drink Gatorade, and they work a desk job, and so those really are going to. But you still can have carbohydrates at a meal. So that's the first thing, is the type. So if you're eating things like fruit, as an example, bananas, apples, those are loaded with nutrition that our body needs, like potassium in bananas, the fiber, the vitamins, the minerals that really support a healthy diet. And then whole fruit, if it's not juiced, it has fiber with it. When you're eating fiber with the fruit, it's going to slow down the release of that sugar into the bloodstream. And typically, depending on the patient, they can have anywhere sometimes from 30 to 45 grams of carbohydrates at a meal. And again, it's preferable to have more whole foods that include the fiber and the nutrients. And a lot of times, the analogy I like to use with patients, it's, here in Fort Worth, we have express lanes that people can get on. When you get on the express lane, you can go as fast as you want. I like to use that analogy when you're eating more refined, processed type of carbohydrates. It goes into the system really fast. What you want in your diet is more of the whole foods, the fruits. That's like being in traffic, and that's what it's like going when those sugars go into the bloodstream. Also helps, keeping you full for a long period of time, which will aid with weight loss. And I think if your audience doesn't know Mastering Diabetes, I'm a big fan of theirs, and read their book, and they're both type 1 diabetics that I think, don't quote me, but I think on average, they eat predominantly a high carbohydrate, high fruit diets that include mangoes and papayas. And I think from anywhere from, 500 plus grams of carbohydrates a day. And they're able to control their blood sugars on a predominantly high carbohydrate diet with using more whole foods packed with nutrition, which are going to help protect you from disease, but also high in fiber.
Yeah, that's a big deal. So
I hope that answered your question.
yes, I think it does. So we're talking about being insulin resistant, and we're talking about fats. So what happens how do we become insulin resistant? How does that happen? I think you're freezing up. Oh, we got you back.
You broke up there. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Maybe the people who are watching, are you hearing Amy okay and seeing me okay? Or is it John that maybe is freezing up for you? So if you can tell us in the comments if any of us are freezing up, so we can figure out which end needs to be addressed. But in the meantime, so if somebody wants to learn about let me just see. Okay, I thought we had a comment. We have a question from somebody. Let's see. Okay, here it is. So Patty Shue wants to know, do I have to worry about too many oxalates switching to a plant-based diet?
That's a good question. I think, specifically, I'm not sure. I think oxalates, I'm not an expert on oxalates. It depends on your particular situation. If there's a reason why you would avoid oxalates, but I don't. I would need to do probably a little bit more research on that specific question. I'm sorry. I think that as long as you're eating, and one thing that I'm really big fan of is following more of a plate method, where you're diversifying your different sources of, let's say, non-starchy vegetables, because I believe oxalates are more non-starchy vegetables. So as long as you're diversifying your vegetable sources, your non-starchy vegetable sources, and not sticking to like the same things every day, because I think oxalates can potentially, as my understanding, could potentially reduce iron absorption, is my understanding. So as long as you're diversifying your cruciferous vegetables and non-starchy vegetables, I would think that you would be fine.
Right. Of course, you can't answer medical questions about an individual having never met them. So that's
Right.
yes, and we
Right.
understand that. But thank you for helping with that. Joe 528 said, "I have diabetes, and my GP told me to avoid fruits, especially those with high glycemic index." We haven't talked too much about that. I really like fruit. What are your
Mm.
thoughts?
Good question. There's the glycemic index and there's the glycemic load, and those have to do with how certain foods like fruit will affect your blood sugar levels. But I think that the glycemic index and the glycemic load, they do take into account the amount of food that you're eating. But what I think that may be more of a limiter on focusing too much on the glycemic index is that it probably doesn't take into account, from my understanding, the other types of foods that you're eating with that meal. And also the glycemic index is not a perfect index, in that, as an example, watermelon is high on the glycemic index, but also carrots, as an example, is high on their glycemic index. So we know both are good for us from an overall standpoint. And if you include those with other things like beans and whole grains, and a healthy fat, that should lower the overall glycemic load because you're incorporating other foods into that meal. So I would probably look at glycemic index more if you're eating those, as an example, watermelon just by itself, and a whole watermelon. That's probably not the best idea. But also, lastly, I would say on that is that also foods that will affect your sugars, from a diabetic standpoint, have to do with your genetic makeup, and your GI. So I would say it's something to look at. But again, going back to what I said earlier, by eating a diversified diet, and fruit is a preferred energy source as long as it's a whole fruit, there's so many types of benefits that probably would out.
I think he froze up for a little bit, but hopefully we'll get him back. I don't know if he's freezing up for you guys, but
And then,
oh, there he goes. Go ahead.
so,
I
and
think
then, and then also, I think of everything when it comes to foods on a spectrum. So as an example, I'd rather you eat potentially something that's higher on the glycemic index, like watermelon and carrots, versus a candy bar that also has.
right, exactly. People are steering away from fruit, but yet they're incorporating these candies, and that's not good either. So that's very important to know. I think a lot of people, and it's unfortunate because a lot of the physicians go through so much training, grueling hours and years of their lives that they train. But yet in medical school, they hardly get any training in
I'm back.
nutrition. I was just
Okay.
telling our green warriors about nutrition training and doctors in medical school, and how they're well meaning when they give out the advice, but they don't really get very much nutrition classes, so that's why they may not always give out the latest
Oh, right.
uh, and greatest advice that's based on science and the latest science and so forth. But
Mm.
that's very good. I think that was
And
a
going back to Joe's question, also one thing that's what's great about technology is if he's checking his glucose, he could also check his blood sugars after having something that's considered high glycemic index with either a glucometer, but with technology, a continuous glucose monitor like a Freestyle Libre or a Dexcom can really give you that sort of that real-time feedback on how that specific meal, whether it's had fruit in it or combined it with other things like avocado, which again is high in fiber, or whole grains. So combining, let's say, something that's a higher glycemic index with other things, you can then test it yourself real time with, let's say, a continuous glucose monitor to see how it affects you personally.
Yeah, that's a wonderful advance in science, that continuous glucose monitor, that you don't have to keep pricking your finger and you can see how the different food is affecting you. And would you say that it's different for different people? That there could be 100 people and they could, some of them could eat certain fruits and maybe not get affected as much with their glucose, and others, what would you say?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, I think I would say it's individualized. I mean, because other things that can affect blood sugar levels are your sleep, your stress levels, how active you are. And so there's many factors that go into how your body responds to a load of sugar. And so I think that, again, it could be, I could have a banana and someone else could have a banana and we could have a totally different response to that. Or watermelon, which again is high on the glycemic index, and have totally two different responses. Something that would be more longer term to look at would be, what are your goals? Are you losing weight? Do you feel good? Do you feel energized? Those are subjective things that I talk about with patients that we can't put a number on. And then second, long-term things are, is your A1C number getting better? Or if you are using a continuous glucose monitor, there's what's called time and range. So are you staying within a certain range? And what your percentage of your time and range is? And then secondly is, how is your overall cardiovascular health? Because I think we can sometimes get focused on if you have diabetes or pre-diabetes, on weight loss, and on improving that, but on the back end from a cardiovascular standpoint, are you getting better from a cholesterol level in a LDL, low density lipoprotein? Are those levels also reducing? So I think when you incorporate a diversified diet that's more plant-based, and you keep your levels of saturated fat below that 10% mark for total calories, and you reduce, one of the guidelines is to reduce added sugars to no more than 10% of your total calories. If you're falling in those ranges and eating the diversified, more plant-based and plant-centric diet, the chances are is that you're eating a less calorie-dense diet, which will help affect all of your biomarkers.
Yeah, that's what I love about
Hopefully
this
that was it. Yeah.
lifestyle. With the lifestyle, that you can eat as much as you want of this food till you're comfortably full. And for people who have
Exactly right.
diabetes, I think that a lot of them have struggle to think about changing their diet, because perhaps they would get hungry and shaky between meals, and they may be worried about that. But with this, you're not going to be hungry if you adopt this lifestyle, because it's designed, it's a special protocol for diabetes, probably, to incorporate the things that are more long lasting, like you said, the beans and the legumes, that you wouldn't have to just count out how many beans you're eating. You could eat as many as you like until you're full, and then they're going to carry you through in between the meals that you're having.
Exactly right. Yeah, I mean, I think some of the things to focus on that can help with the satiety is first focus on, and a lot of times when I work with patients is more of a plate method. So having at least a quarter of your plate, like a regular size plate that is, have that be some type of protein source. That could be beans, lentils, soy products are complete protein, meaning it has all the 9 essential amino
Yeah, I think you might have frozen up a little bit there for me anyway. Oh,
acids, some type of whole
acids.
grain or starchy vegetable. That's really going to, especially when incorporating whole grains, things like brown rice, quinoa, uh, oatmeal, that's going to fiber, which will help with, keeping you full for a long period of time. And then the second half of the plate, that can be more flexible, especially non-starchy vegetables. Starch, meaning non-starchy, meaning that there's really not much sugar in them, will help with increasing bulk of the meal. And then maybe just a little bit of fruit, depending on your specific situation. That's a very diversified, but also what you're going to be eating is really a lot of food. And so you're really going to be filling up the stomach with a lot of whole foods, which will keep you full for a long period of time. And one of the things that hopefully it will help you do is help with satiety and avoid the snacking in between meals, which tends to be sort of that trap for people when it comes to weight loss.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right. Now, one of our viewers is talking about, so let's see. Skylove said, we don't eat fruit hardly at all, but we eat berries in moderation. No processed foods either. John's blood sugar is normal now, and he lost about 25 pounds in the last 3 to 4 months. It's been amazing. So I'm not sure if this is a plant-based diet, because I think if it was, there wouldn't be much limitation on the fruit.
Yeah, that's great. Congratulations. So that's awesome. It sounds like a success story to me. So that's the one thing, is that there's no one size fits all. So it ends up being and I think a big key there was eating berries in moderation. And then really, I think with reducing or eliminating processed foods is really a big key, because processed foods really tend to, cause us to overeat, which causes the weight gain. Congratulations. That's amazing.
Right. Now, if I'm not sure what diet this is, it could very well be a keto. I don't know, because a plant-based diet probably wouldn't limit the fruits. So if somebody did adopt a keto diet, they probably would see success in the beginning, right? Because they're eliminating their processed foods, which is one of the reasons why the keto diet works. Is there a caveat if somebody did do a keto diet for long term?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so going back to not just focusing on just one, obviously there's a lot of things to look at there. But one thing would be subjectively, how do they feel? Do they feel like they have good energy? So there's a lot of things we can't put a number on. So if they feel like they're moving in the right direction, that could be one thing. But looking underneath the hood, just like a car, don't always judge a book by its cover. So looking underneath the hood, I would be looking at things like, number one, are their cholesterol levels rising? So if you're increasing saturated fat, so if you're reducing fruit and increasing fat, and especially saturated fat, that potentially can be causing things underneath the hood to happen that you're not seeing. So I would be really watching your cholesterol levels. If the total cholesterol exceeds 200, we know that's a risk factor for potential heart disease and strokes. Also, if their LDL, low density lipoprotein number, exceeds 100, that can be a risk factor. Other things that can be happening, is their blood pressure rising? Are they having any kidney issues, especially if their kidney biomarkers, are they, starting to increase? So I would be working closely with a healthcare professional if you're taking on that type of diet, and not just focusing on how your blood sugars are, because one thing that you're not really doing is you're not necessarily challenging your body with carbohydrates when you're on more of a keto diet. But once you start to incorporate, if you go out and you go to a ballpark and you have that hot dog with the bun, now you're challenging your body with some carbohydrates that it's not used to. And so, that can be an issue. So again, there is no one size fits all. But I would be looking at many different things when it comes to the keto diet, not just how my blood sugars are doing, and also if I'm getting some immediate weight loss, the long-term effects of, from a cardiovascular standpoint, kidney standpoint, potential kidney stones by increasing your protein intake. So there's a lot of downstream things that can happen when you're increasing saturated fat, and also more of protein, maybe going too high of protein in the diet. And so I would proceed with caution, and also work closely with my physician to watch those biomarkers and make sure what's underneath the hood, the things that you're not necessarily seeing that may not rear its head more, could rear its head let's say later down on the road, let's say 6 months, a year, 2 years down the road.
Right. And I think and like everybody's different. So we can't say what's good for one person and what isn't, especially if you haven't met them and know all their numbers and their lab results and things like that. But I think it is, for any time you make a
Exactly.
lifestyle change, I think it's important to monitor all those things that you were talking about. Even if somebody adopted a plant-based diet, it's important to
Exactly.
monitor things. And sometimes when we first adopt a lifestyle, we see great results, but like you said, down the road there may be some things that come up. So I think it's good advice for everybody, no matter which lifestyle you adopt, to keep working with your healthcare professional and monitor all these things to make sure that you're still on track, even though you may have lost weight or may have more energy in the very beginning. So I think that's great advice.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's see if we
Exactly.
have, another. Oh, Angie B. Starches and potatoes, white potatoes. I'm confused. I have diabetes. Can I eat potatoes? Is it okay if they're white?
Yeah, I mean, so again, not really necessarily giving medical advice. I would go back to what I talked about earlier, is that our body's preferred fuel source for energy is carbohydrates. So I would focus on two things. Number one is the amount that you're eating per meal. For males, typically one serving is 15 grams of carbohydrates. So for most females, you want to stick to your main meals, anywhere between 2 to 3 servings of carbohydrates. So if it's a small potato versus a large potato, and so I would try and figure out how many grams of carbohydrates that would fit into. An example, a large potato would probably be closer to 45 grams. So if you're a female, that would probably take up all of your grams for that meal from a carbohydrate standpoint. And then second is quality over, let's say I would prefer you to have a white potato or anything that's a whole food, because potatoes are packed with nutrients. Whether they're russet potatoes, red potatoes, sweet potatoes, they all are packed with nutrition, and also they're packed with fiber. So if that's if your blood sugar levels are not, and it's okay for your blood sugar levels to go up. They should go up after a meal. But what is the key? They do need to go down eventually a couple hours after the meal. But I think you can have potatoes, but you want to make sure that you're staying within limits depending on your situation. And I'd rather you have that than, let's say, something that's more refined, like white rice or the chips. Like a potato, if you fry it and put it in oil and make it into potato chips, now you've increased the calorie density. So as an example, a large potato probably is only 200 calories. And that's not very calorie dense when you look at the calorie dense scale. So white potatoes, sweet potatoes, as long as you keep them within limits, and you don't stack on the butter and the plant-based butter and the oils and the cheese and things like that, then that's a healthy plant-based option even for diabetics.
Yeah, that sounds great. And that's what after adopting, well, I adopted this back in 2012, so my taste buds have changed and they've become more sensitive to flavors, so I don't need to add on these things. And so now I can eat a potato. I can just eat it for a snack sometimes and eat it, sometimes I'll eat a cold baked potato or sweet potato, and I can taste all the different flavors in there that I never could before. I would have to put salt and butter and all kinds of things on it to make it enjoyable. And now it's very enjoyable. So it's really a great thing. And I'm glad that you talked about that, because it can be confusing. You talked about the rice too, because I think people think that you go to a rice paddy and you get white rice, and then you go to a different rice paddy and you get brown rice. So
Yeah. So
it's not two different rices that we grow, right?
right. I mean, there's many different. I'm not a rice expert, but going back to the potatoes, another thing is an air fryer. I mean, the air fryer has been a godsend to me, because I don't like to spend a lot of time in the kitchen. So you can get that fried taste by, let's say, taking a sweet potato, russet potato, chopping it up into, make your own potato fries, throw it in an air fryer. That way you're not having to use oil. But again, it's a carbohydrate source that our body is, when we eat things that are more natural, less refined, our body recognizes how to distribute that into where it's more efficient at burning that as a source of fuel. And second, going to the rice, there are white rices that can be enriched. So that can be, not necessarily all white rices are refined. So not a rice expert, but my understanding is the darker the rice, the darker the color of rice, because I'm more of a brown rice because of the nutrition, but even black rice, wild rice, usually the darker the rice, usually the more nutrition has in the rice. So I think that as long as you're eating at least half of your grains, whole grains, it's okay. I would say it's okay to have, more of the white rice, if that's helping you with your weight loss and getting to your goals. But it is better to opt for more whole grains. But it's better than going to, let's say, to a fast food place. So everything's on a spectrum. So white rice, if that helps you, like as an example, usually when I have sushi, it's got white rice. So it's all usually on a spectrum, and as long as you're staying usually within those carbohydrate limits, usually you should be okay.
All right. And here's this is a medical question, so if you don't feel comfortable answering it,
Okay.
I understand. Avery G said, can peripheral neuropathy be cured? I'm assuming he's talking about peripheral neuropathy that is caused by having diabetes, because I guess there are other ways to get the neuropathy.
I don't know the specific answer to that question, but what I would say is that when I think of peripheral, or things that are like, let's say, our feet, or any type of thing that has to do with our body, one of the first things I think about is, oxygen-rich blood, and how fast we can get that oxygen-rich blood to those places in the body. And so what that typically means is things that have more nitric oxide will help with with vasodilation, because nitric oxide is found mostly in your cruciferous vegetables, things like green leafy vegetables, beetroots. So as you adopt or incorporate more plant-based foods that have more nitric oxide, that's going to help with increasing nitric oxide, which will increase with getting that oxygen-rich blood to every part of the body, even our feet. And then the second way that you can increase nitric oxide naturally is through exercise. So exercise is a natural nitric oxide elixir. So by adopting a more of a plant-based diet, rich in green leafy vegetables, cruciferous vegetables, will help get that oxygen-rich blood to those different areas of the body, which will hopefully reduce peripheral neuropathy.
Okay, here's another question from Sky Love. I have a strange question. I don't think any questions are strange, so I'm glad you're all asking. Are potatoes and grains considered plants?
Yeah, as far as I know, I mean, I don't know technically. I know potatoes would be considered more of what it's a root vegetable. And grains are, come from grain fields. So as far as I know, that they're considered plants. So I don't know the technical. I'd have to Google, but
Yeah.
but as far as I know, I believe that they're plants.
Yeah. And I've grown potatoes, which
Yeah,
are
I mean, so
wonderful. And you can even eat the greens because the potatoes are the roots and they grow underground, but they have greens on top, and you can eat the greens too.
exactly,
So in my mind, that's a plant, right?
exactly right.
Okay. All right. So let's see. Oh,
I've got
so
to wrap up here. I
yes,
got
we're
a
going to
couple
have to
minutes. Yeah,
wrap it up, right?
yeah.
So I want to thank everybody for all the questions that you provided for us today, and I also wanted to give John a chance to talk about what do you do and how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I've been a registered diet. This is a second career for me, by the way. So I've been a registered dietitian almost 4 years now. My first career was in financial services. So I work full time as a diabetes educator in Fort Worth, Texas, for Baylor Scott and White. I'm an outpatient dietitian, but I also see patients in my private practice. You can see more information about me on Instagram at John Massengale Nutrition. And then second, I have a website, John Massengale Nutrition. So if you're interested in adopting a more plant-based diet, you don't have to be vegan. You want to work with a registered dietitian that provides evidence-based solutions, and you want something that's individualized, please contact me, send me a message through Instagram is probably the best way. And be more than happy to answer questions. Again, I work with clients one-on-one. But I'm passionate about, I've been personally plant-based for going on, I don't know, around 10 or 11 years now. And I'm an endurance athlete. I've completed an Ironman in 2014. And I've done the Leadville 100 mountain bike race, which is a 100-mile mountain bike race in Leadville, Colorado. This last weekend, I did a 100-mile. It was my first gravel endurance race. It was in Trinidad, Colorado. So it was a great experience. It took me 7 hours, but I believe in the power of a plant-based diet to manage diabetes and potentially reverse it, bring it into remission. But the power of plants is amazing. I've felt it in my own life. I'm in my early 50s, and I feel like I'm as strong as ever. I perform, and I rarely get injured or rarely get sick. So I truly believe in the power of a plant-based diet, and the science backs it up. It's recommended by the American Diabetes Association. So if you want to contact me, I'd love to work with anyone in your audience.
Oh, that's great. It's nice to have a registered dietitian that knows the science and can help. So I want to thank you again for being on the show. And Green Warriors, tell us what you're going to remember. What was your takeaway from this presentation? And please stay tuned for a special announcement. I wanted to thank Just Task Voice for doing the countdown and the promos and all the different things that she does. And Just Task Voice, tell us who's coming up next.
Achieve optimal health at 80 years young. Author of The Thriving Vegan, Michael Dorfman will discuss how to thrive on a plant-based diet on Wednesday, October 19th, 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific, on Be Green with Amy Live.
I just wanted, Angela Fischetti said, we need many more plant-based registered dietitians like John Massengale. So I wanted to tell you that. You can read the rest of the comments.
Yeah.
And if you guys want to help me end the broadcast with John, because he's going to help me with my tagline, which is the Be Strong, Be Well, and then he's going to say Be Green, and you guys can type that in the comments. Are you ready, John?
I'm ready.
All right. Well, until I see all of you again, please remember to stay healthy and safe, and be strong, be well, and be
green. Yeah.
Thanks so
right.
much, John. Thanks,
All
Green
right.
Warriors. Bye-bye, everyone.
3.
We got it.
Now you can listen to Be Green with Amy expert interviews wherever you go. Listen while walking, meal prepping, or traveling. Find Be Green with Amy on Apple, Google, Alexa, Amazon, or virtually anywhere you find podcasts. Be strong, be well.